The explosion was heard across the center of Moscow, but for several seconds, no one understood what had happened. According to initial reports, a powerful detonation struck the Kremlin compound, triggering alarms and immediate lockdown across government buildings. Official statements were delayed. When they finally appeared, they spoke of a localized incident, carefully avoiding the word that already dominated private channels: attack. By this moment, all signs pointed to a single conclusion: something unprecedented had taken place. Security services sealed off the entire district. Airspace was closed, and mobile communication in the area abruptly stopped functioning. Yet even in that silence, fragments of information began to leak. According to multiple sources within the security apparatus, the explosion originated near one of the administrative wings used for internal briefings. The scale of damage remains unclear, but insiders describe the blast as surgical, precise enough to bypass defenses, strong enough to make a statement. Within hours, speculation spread faster than any official response. The phrase "Ukrainian strike" appeared in closed briefings before it ever reached the public. In expert circles, the very possibility of such an operation inside the heart of Russian power is being described as a geopolitical earthquake. If confirmed, it would mark not just a symbolic breach, but a direct challenge to the image of invulnerability, carefully cultivated for decades. Official media channels remain cautious, limiting coverage to footage of emergency vehicles and silent corridors. But among insiders, the question is no longer whether the Kremlin was attacked. It is how. According to preliminary assessments obtained through diplomatic intermediaries, the explosion was likely caused by an unmanned aerial vehicle carrying a compact high-yield charge. Several defense analysts note that this method aligns with a pattern of previous Ukrainian long-range operations, though the scale and precision suggest a new level of sophistication. Officially, Russian authorities refer to the event as an act of provocation by foreign agents. Unofficially, security sources are treating it as a direct military strike on the command infrastructure itself. Inside the government, the shock is visible even through layers of protocol. Meetings have been canceled, communication between ministries suspended, and all scheduled public appearances abruptly withdrawn. According to insiders, President Putin has been moved to a secure location within the Central Command network. His reaction, described by those briefed on the matter, was contained but visibly shaken. One senior official, speaking under condition of anonymity, reportedly said, "This changes everything." Meanwhile, across state media, the tone has shifted from defiance to caution. Anchors speak slowly, choosing their words with visible care. The usual phrases about stability and control sound thinner, almost fragile. In the absence of clear information, the silence itself has become the story. Analysts within Russia's political establishment admit privately that the psychological impact of the attack may exceed the physical damage. If the Kremlin can be reached, one strategist noted, then nowhere is safe. In foreign capitals, the response is equally tense. Diplomatic channels are flooded with inquiries, yet no official claims of responsibility have been issued. Western intelligence agencies remain silent, but internal assessments reportedly classify the incident as strategically transformative. In expert communities, the discussion centers on the symbolism of the event, the fortress of Russian power, breached not by armies, but by a single precision strike. The implications, they warn, extend far beyond Moscow. But deeper questions are already emerging. How could this happen in one of the most heavily guarded locations on Earth? According to early internal assessments, Russia's air defense systems did not react until moments after the detonation. Whether this was a failure of detection or deliberate interference remains under investigation. In military circles, the possibility of an internal breach is being considered with growing unease. The perimeter did not fail, one source reportedly said. Something inside did. The image of the Kremlin, its walls intact, but its aura of invincibility, shattered, has become the new symbol of uncertainty. Official broadcasts attempt to restore composure, repeating that all state functions continue as normal. Yet even in that sentence, the word normal sounds obsolete. The capital is on alert, the leadership is silent, and the world is watching a moment that no one was supposed to witness. For those who follow these developments closely, this feels less like an isolated event and more like the start of a new phase, one where symbols fall faster than systems can respond. Perhaps it is worth paying attention to what happens next, because according to several insiders, this explosion was not just an attack. It was a message, and the message, they say, was unmistakably clear. The war has reached the center. Throughout the day, official Moscow struggled to regain its voice. The first coordinated statements emerged only after hours of internal silence, describing the explosion as an act of external sabotage and insisting that the situation remains under control. Yet the tone was unfamiliar, defensive, fragmented, uncertain. According to multiple sources, emergency meetings within the Security Council were marked by visible disarray. Communication channels between ministries were restricted, and several senior officials reportedly demanded to know why air defenses had failed to intercept the object that struck the Kremlin. No clear answer was given. In the absence of clarity, speculation has filled the void. According to preliminary intelligence assessments shared within diplomatic circles, the device that detonated inside the Kremlin complex was a high-precision drone launched from a considerable distance. The sophistication of the operation has surprised even seasoned analysts. This was not improvisation, one Western security expert commented privately. It was a message designed to pass through every layer of defense. Within Russia's own security apparatus, the reaction has been described as controlled panic, an internal phrase used when order exists only in appearance. Across official media, coverage remains tightly choreographed. Broadcasters repeat footage of the Kremlin walls, unbroken but visibly scorched. The emphasis is on continuity. Government meetings continue. The president is in contact with security services. Stability is maintained. But behind the screens, insiders describe an atmosphere of paralysis. According to information obtained from individuals close to the administration, the first question raised during the crisis briefing was not about casualties, but about symbolism. What does it mean, one participant reportedly asked, when the heart of the state is no longer untouchable? In expert circles, this question has already found its answer. Analysts describe the attack as a turning point, a psychological strike that redefines the balance of power. It is no longer about military capacity, one economist noted. It's about perception. If the Kremlin can be reached, then deterrence itself no longer functions. The implications are being discussed quietly across the security establishment. Some fear that a retaliatory strike may follow, designed to restore lost authority. Others warn that such a response could expose even greater vulnerabilities. For the public, information remains scarce and contradictory. Social networks, heavily monitored since early morning, are flooded with censored posts and deleted footage. Still, fragments persist. Images of smoke above the Kremlin towers, the reflection of flashing lights across the river, the echo of sirens fading into silence. Official spokespeople deny reports of injuries or damage to state facilities, yet eyewitnesses speak of visible structural impact. The explosion was not large, one resident told an independent outlet before the post was removed, but it was precise. You could feel the ground shake. Within the military command structure, internal protocols have shifted into what is described as Level 2 continuity mode, a rarely used framework that centralizes decision-making and suspends standard procedures. In practice, it means that every strategic communication must be approved personally by the defense leadership. Analysts interpret this as a sign that the government fears secondary disruptions, whether technical, political, or informational. When a state seals its own speech, an insider remarked, "It means the shock has reached the core." Internationally, reactions remain cautious but closely coordinated. Western governments have avoided public comment, though several intelligence services are believed to be verifying satellite data from the hours preceding the blast. Privately, officials express disbelief that such an operation could have penetrated one of the world's most fortified perimeters. Some suggest internal complicity. Others point to advanced drone capabilities previously unseen in the conflict. For now, no conclusive evidence has been presented. Meanwhile, within Russia's elite circles, the silence is interpreted differently. According to insiders, the incident has deepened existing fractures between the political and security establishments. Some factions are calling for immediate escalation, viewing restraint as weakness. Others argue that any retaliation would expose how thin the defensive fabric has become. The real damage, one senior analyst said, is not the explosion itself, it's the fear of what it revealed. By this point, the narrative has begun to split. Officially, the Kremlin insists that normal operations continue. Unofficially, Moscow has entered a new state, one defined not by destruction but by doubt. Across the city, unmarked vehicles patrol government districts. Security cameras swivel in synchronized rhythm, and the air feels denser as if something invisible has shifted. The question that circulates quietly among diplomats and analysts alike is no longer who carried out the attack, but what it means for the structure of power built on the illusion of permanence. In a single moment, the war that once seemed distant has crossed every political, psychological, and symbolic boundary. And though officials repeat the phrase, "situation under control," those who listen carefully can already hear the undertone, the realization that control, once lost, is the hardest thing to reclaim. By now, the internal narrative within Russia's power structure has fractured completely. According to several sources familiar with confidential briefings, the Security Council spent the day not discussing retaliation, but containment. The problem, insiders say, is no longer the explosion itself, but its implications. If the Kremlin can be hit, it means that the illusion of total protection, the very foundation of Russian authority, has dissolved. This was not an attack on a building, one participant reportedly stated. It was an attack on the system's mythology. Official broadcasts continue to project calm. Footage of Putin's recent appearances is being replayed continuously, accompanied by statements that leadership remains fully operational. Yet analysts who have reviewed the footage note a subtle but telling shift, the absence of direct references to the Kremlin, the very symbol of his rule. According to multiple insiders, the president has not returned to the compound since the explosion. Instead, communications are being coordinated from a secure military facility outside Moscow, described in internal documents as a temporary command center. The relocation, though unannounced, is seen by experts as the clearest confirmation of internal disruption. Within intelligence agencies, the investigation has turned inward. Security officers have been ordered to trace every movement within the Kremlin perimeter during the 24 hours preceding the explosion. According to information shared by a source with access to preliminary findings, investigators are examining the possibility of an internal breach. Someone within the system who provided targeting data. The notion of infiltration at such a level has sent shockwaves through the upper echelons of government. If it was not sabotage from outside, one analyst remarked, then the real danger is already inside. Across the capital, the public response remains muted but uneasy. People continue their routines, yet the psychological tone has changed. The idea that an explosion could reach the Kremlin, the physical and symbolic heart of power, has shaken even those long accustomed to crisis. In markets, cafes, and transport lines, conversations begin with lowered voices and end abruptly when security patrols pass by. The silence, analysts note, is not ignorance, it is recognition. In the military establishment, discussions have grown more divided. The General Staff, according to leaked summaries, favors a demonstration of strength, a retaliatory act that would restore deterrence. But the political leadership is reportedly hesitant. Several senior officials fear that any rash escalation might confirm what foreign analysts already suspect, that Moscow's air defense network, long portrayed as impenetrable, is fractured. The debate, for now, remains unresolved. It is the first time in years, said one intelligence source, that no one seems to know who holds the initiative. Foreign observers have begun to read the silence as its own form of signal. Satellite data reviewed by independent analysts suggest increased activity near several strategic command centers, though no visible mobilization has occurred. Western governments, for their part, remain cautious, urging restraint while quietly monitoring for signs of Russian retaliation. Diplomats describe the mood as frozen vigilance, everyone waiting, aware that any response could shift the balance of the conflict irreversibly. At home, the state media's restraint is unprecedented. Anchors now speak in clipped phrases, avoiding the word Ukraine altogether. Instead, they use vague formulations. External provocation, foreign interference, attempted destabilization. Yet even these terms cannot conceal the underlying narrative fracture. For years, the Kremlin has built its image on invulnerability. That image has now cracked in public view, and as one senior official admitted privately, you can rebuild a wall. You cannot rebuild the myth that it was unbreakable. According to information from diplomatic channels, Putin's closest advisors are divided into two camps. One advocates secrecy and denial. Bury the incident under layers of bureaucracy until it fades from the collective memory. The other urges immediate retaliation, arguing that silence looks like weakness. Both approaches carry risk. The first erodes credibility. The second could trigger escalation on a scale the system can no longer control. Between these two fears, paralysis has set in. Meanwhile, within the broader state apparatus, something quieter but more significant is occurring: the spread of doubt. Mid-level officials, once unquestioningly loyal, are beginning to ask whether the system they serve is as secure as it appears. For a regime built on perception, such questions are dangerous. Control in Russia has always been psychological, explains one political analyst. The moment fear turns into disbelief, the mechanism stops working. In the midst of this uncertainty, analysts outside the country describe today's events as the symbolic end of an era, the moment when the fortress ceased to be a fortress. Power, one European diplomat observed, is not only about force, it is about the belief that it cannot be touched. That belief just vanished. Still, no one in Moscow speaks these words aloud. The official narrative continues: stability, order, composure. But among those watching from within, the realization grows that something irreversible has begun, and perhaps it is worth paying close attention, not just to what will be said in the coming hours, but to what will remain unsaid. Because according to several insiders, the Kremlin explosion was not the end of a story. It was the first visible sign of one that had already been unfolding quietly inside the system itself. Inside the Russian power apparatus, the day has taken on the texture of controlled confusion. Officially, the investigation continues, in accordance with established procedures. Unofficially, multiple agencies are working at cross purposes, each trying to prove that the fault lies elsewhere. According to insiders, the Federal Security Service, the Ministry of Defense, and the Presidential Security Directorate are engaged in a silent struggle for narrative control. Everyone is afraid to report the truth, one source familiar with the proceedings noted, because the truth would mean that the system failed at its core. The explosion itself has now been reconstructed in classified briefings. The findings, though not made public, have circulated among high-ranking officials. A single drone, low altitude, precise trajectory, and no interception. How it reached the Kremlin remains unanswered. Some experts suggest a failure of radar calibration, others a deliberate interference signal. Yet a third hypothesis, whispered but not written, speaks of access assistance, someone within the perimeter who helped guide the device. If that is confirmed, the event would not merely be a breach, it would be a betrayal. In the corridors of power, this suspicion has produced an unfamiliar sensation, fear directed inward. Security clearances are being reviewed, communication devices confiscated, loyalty questioned. According to information from individuals close to the investigation, several mid-ranking officers have already been detained for procedural violations. None of their names have been released, and no official confirmation has followed. The opacity, analysts say, is deliberate, a signal that control is being reasserted, even if clarity is not. Meanwhile, the state's external posture grows more defensive. The Foreign Ministry has issued a formal statement accusing Western intelligence coordination of orchestrating the incident, though without naming specific actors. Western officials have dismissed the claim, calling it an expected deflection. But the rhetoric serves a domestic purpose. It allows Moscow to frame the event not as a failure of internal defense, but as an escalation of global confrontation. The narrative of external threat once again becomes the safest political refuge. Inside the military establishment, however, the tone is shifting. According to documents reviewed by analysts, several generals have expressed frustration that civilian leadership continues to delay a response. Inaction, one senior officer reportedly said during a closed meeting, is more dangerous than the attack itself. For now, restraint prevails, not out of strategy, but out of uncertainty. Every potential move carries risk. A retaliatory strike could invite escalation, but silence could signal weakness. It is a dilemma with no safe exit. Across Moscow, the visible signs of unease are multiplying. The city center remains heavily guarded. Drones patrol the skyline, and public gatherings are quietly discouraged. Officially, this is described as enhanced security readiness. Unofficially, it feels like occupation. Even among government employees, whispers of fear circulate, not of another strike, but of internal purges. No one knows who will be blamed, a bureaucrat confided to an intermediary. Everyone is writing reports to protect themselves. At the same time, information control has tightened further. State media now airs only brief segments about the incident, followed by extended coverage of routine governmental work. The goal, analysts suggest, is to restore the illusion of normalcy, but in expert circles, the silence itself is being read as evidence of fracture. When the Kremlin stops speaking, one observer noted, it means the machinery beneath it is no longer synchronized. The psychological impact on the leadership appears significant. Sources close to Putin describe him as withdrawn, relying increasingly on a small circle of long-trusted figures. Internal memos reviewed by analysts indicate that his schedule has been stripped of all public appearances until stabilization of informational conditions. The phrase, used rarely and only during crises, signals that the president's presence has become a security variable. In other words, visibility itself is now considered a risk. Abroad, intelligence assessments suggest that the Kremlin is weighing an asymmetric response, not necessarily military, but political and cybernetic. Western analysts interpret this as a shift from immediate retaliation to long-term psychological warfare. If the physical center of power is vulnerable, one security expert noted, then control must be projected elsewhere, through fear, surveillance, and unpredictability. Yet even within that framework, cracks continue to widen. Insiders report growing mistrust among senior figures, some of whom now communicate through intermediaries rather than directly. The atmosphere, described by one participant, is paranoid efficiency. Everyone working harder, speaking less, suspecting more. No one wants to make the next mistake, the source said, because this time, mistakes are no longer survivable. As the day continues, it becomes clear that the explosion was not only a physical event, but a psychological detonation within the structure of power. The Kremlin may still stand, its walls unbroken, but its meaning has changed. What once represented absolute authority now embodies exposure. What once radiated strength now reflects fragility. According to several analysts, this is the real consequence of the attack, not the damage to stone, but the damage to certainty. A fortress that can be struck, one political scientist remarked, ceases to be a fortress. It becomes a target that remembers. Still, the official line remains unchanged. Stability, unity, control. The same words repeated, the same composure performed. But those who have seen the internal briefings speak differently. They describe the tone not as confidence, but as calculation, a leadership that has begun to understand that the threat is no longer external. And behind that understanding, one phrase is starting to circulate quietly within the elite. We are not defending the Kremlin anymore. We are defending the idea that it still exists. By this point, the Kremlin stands intact, yet hollow, a fortress turned echo chamber. The walls have been repaired, the smoke dispersed, and the official narrative restored. But the silence inside tells a different story. According to multiple sources familiar with internal discussions, the government has entered what analysts call a post-shock phase, a period when stability is measured not by control, but by the ability to hide the absence of it. In formal language, officials now describe the explosion as a resolved security incident. But inside the system, the phrase carries another meaning. The event is over. Its consequences are not. The day unfolds under the surface of routine. State television shows archive footage of meetings, while anchors repeat the same sentence. The president is fully informed and continues to lead the country. Yet even those within the apparatus admit privately that something intangible has shifted. The belief in untouchability, long cultivated as a pillar of authority, has vanished. The Kremlin used to be a symbol of protection, said one insider in a restricted conversation. Now it is a reminder of exposure. According to reports reviewed by security analysts, the investigation into the blast has reached an impasse. No external launch point has been confirmed, no suspect publicly named. Internally, the absence of evidence is interpreted as worse than failure. It implies infiltration. For the first time, the leadership is forced to consider the unthinkable, that someone inside the structure had access to coordinates, protocols, and clearance. It is not about who launched the drone, one investigator remarked off record. It's about who left the gate open. In expert circles, this realization is being described as a crisis of legitimacy. The state built on control now confronts the possibility that its own defenses can be bypassed, not by superior force, but by precision, timing, and intent. This was not just an explosion, one political analyst said. It was a demonstration, a reminder that the machinery of power can be touched, disrupted, and made to tremble. Western intelligence assessments echo this sentiment, noting that even without physical destruction, the psychological impact of the strike has permanently altered the Kremlin's internal dynamics. From now on, one senior diplomat observed, every silence from Moscow will sound different. Behind closed doors, preparations for a symbolic response continue. Draft plans for a televised address have been written and rewritten, each version more restrained than the last. Advisors reportedly warn against visible emotion, urging the president to project control through understatement. He must appear calm, reads one memo, even if he no longer feels safe. Whether the address will happen at all remains uncertain. Officials close to the decision describe a growing fear that any public appearance could invite another strike, not on the body, but on the image. At the same time, a quieter process is unfolding. the internal consolidation of power. Several regional heads have been summoned to Moscow for consultations, though sources indicate the meetings serve a different purpose: loyalty verification. Security agencies have expanded monitoring of military and administrative communications. The goal, analysts believe, is to rebuild the illusion of coordination through surveillance. When trust collapses, one former official explained, control becomes mechanical. In the capital, life continues with the strange composure that follows collective shock. People pass the Kremlin walls as if nothing happened, though glances linger longer than before. The city remains calm, but it is the calm of endurance, not confidence. In social media, posts referring to the explosion vanish within minutes, replaced by recycled slogans about unity and resilience. The repetition feels ritualistic, like a spell meant to hold together what reason cannot. According to data from internal monitoring units, public anxiety has not turned into outrage. It has turned inward. The dominant emotion, analysts say, is disbelief, not that the Kremlin was attacked, but that it could be. The system survives, one observer noted, because people still cannot imagine its absence, but imagination grows in silence. That silence now stretches across the country, long, dense, and heavy. Abroad, experts debate whether the attack was strategic or symbolic. Some argue it was designed to expose the limits of Russian power. Others see it as a psychological test, a strike meant to provoke reflection rather than retaliation. Whatever the motive, the result is the same. The myth of invulnerability has been erased. The question that remains is what replaces it. Within Russia's elite, an unspoken understanding has begun to form. The real threat is not another explosion, it is uncertainty. The kind that creeps quietly through the hierarchy, dissolving discipline, eroding fear, and leaving only reflex. For 2 decades, one insider said, the Kremlin has ruled through predictability. That era ended today. Officially, the narrative remains firm. The state stands strong. But the meaning of strength has changed. It no longer means immunity. It means persistence, the capacity to keep functioning even when the structure beneath has cracked. The machinery still moves, but every motion feels cautious, rehearsed, aware of its own fragility. By this hour, the day draws to a close without closure. There are no new statements, no images, no reassurances, only the lingering echo of a single blast that reached further than sound, into the foundation of power itself. In expert communities, the consensus is forming quietly. The explosion did not destroy the Kremlin, it revealed it. What happens next will depend not on the strength of walls, but on the endurance of the illusion they once embodied. And as Moscow returns to its routine, beneath the surface of official composure, one thought remains unspoken yet widely shared, that the real detonation has only just begun.